Captain Zeke Stranwell was the youngest graduate in human Space Force history, an achievement made more impressive by the fact that he still couldn't parallel park his ship. To the rest of the fleet, he was a prodigy. To himself, he was a nervous wreck, barely keeping his coffee from floating out of its cup. The only thing keeping him afloat, both metaphorically and occasionally, literally, was Commander Horatio Bixby. A veteran of countless intergalactic skirmishes, Bixby was a man whose tactical brilliance was only rivaled by his ability to find creative uses for space duct tape. When Zeke had been assigned to his ship, the Wobbly Nebula, he'd been told he'd learned the real tricks of the trade. He hadn't realized that meant learning to outplay aliens using playground games. Rule 1, Bixby growled during their first tactical briefing, which was held over a suspiciously sticky table in the mess hall. Aliens don't know what to do with our games. Turns out, they're suckers for novelty. Use it. Games, Zeke blinked. Like chess? Chess, Bixby bellowed with laughter, slapping the table so hard that his half-eaten space sandwich ricocheted off the wall. No, lad, real games. Hide and seek, tag, good old Red Rover. You tell 'em it's a sacred human ritual, promise to share some mystical secrets, and before you know it, they've lowered their shields faster than a Zornox chasing a glow bug. And they believe it? Zeke asked, incredulous. 87% of the time, Bixby replied, polishing his laser scope. The other 13%. Well, that's what the reverse thrusters are for. Now come on, let's practice your ready or not. Here I come, voice. By Zeke's third encounter with an alien species, he had grudgingly accepted that Bixby's methods, as ridiculous as they sounded, actually worked. The Graclurian horde, known for their impenetrable defenses, had gleefully joined a game of interstellar Red Rover after being promised the ancient human battle chant would unlock their ship's hyperdrive potential. Red Rover, let Graclurians come over, Zeke hollered across the void, his voice amplified through the ship's speakers. The Graclurians, naturally suspicious yet eternally curious, had relented and dropped their shields. Right before the Wobbly Nebula zapped their propulsion systems and flew off with their cargo of hyper-cocoa beans. You see? Bixby crowed, clapping Zeke on the back. There's no problem so big it can't be solved with a little nonsense and a well-timed double-cross. One day, after a particularly successful game of alien hide-and-seek with a fleet of rather gullible Troglians, Bixby decided it was time for Zeke to learn the final lesson. Listen up, Squirt, he said, leaning in conspiratorially. Most alien ships led by queens. Queens, Zeke repeated, confused. Like monarchs? Exactly. Big, scary, intergalactic monarchs. And here's the thing about queens. They love a good bargain. If all else fails, you sweeten the deal. Offer 'em something irresistible. Like what? Zeke asked, fearing the answer. Yourself. What? Relax, Bixby said, waving dismissively. It's not what you think. Well, not entirely. Look, these queens have needs, and sometimes you've got to entertain to negotiate peace. It's tradition, like the harems on Earth except with men, and aliens, you'll be fine. Before Zeke could argue, the view screen flickered to life, revealing Queen Zeralta, an alien monarch with an intimidating crown of tentacles and a disturbingly charming smile. Commander Bixby, she purred, her glowing eyes flicking between the seasoned commander and the utterly bewildered Zeke. I see you've delivered your end of the deal. As promised, I will uphold the peace treaty. Glad to hear it, Your Majesty, Bixby said smoothly, saluting. Now my young protege here will— Wait! Zeke interjected, flailing. What exactly am I supposed to— Just smile, lad, Bixby whispered. You've got a nice one. Queens love that. Commander, Zeralta interrupted, her gaze now fixed on Zeke. Your apprentice looks promising. This arrangement will do nicely. As the view screen cut off, Zeke spun to Bixby, his voice an octave higher than usual. What just happened? Congrats, kid, Bixby said, patting him on the back. You're a diplomat now. Think of it as a rite of passage. Just Keep your wits about you and maybe avoid asking too many questions. But relax. You're doing your part for galactic peace. And if it gets weird, just remember, it's all in the name of strategy." Zeke groaned. Somewhere deep in the cosmos, an alien queen was waiting, and he was starting to think he'd been grossly underprepared for this job. Still, he had to admit, there was something oddly satisfying about being the galaxy's most unconventional captain. Zeke Stranwell adjusted the ornate golden sash across his chest, the one Queen Zralta had insisted he wear at all times. "A symbol of your status as my most trusted advisor," she'd called it. Zeke privately thought it made him look like a contestant in a very intense space pageant, but he wasn't about to argue with someone who could incinerate a star with a flick of her tentacle crown. To his own surprise, life as the Queen's advisor wasn't all bad. Sure, he had to endure formal dinners where the appetizers occasionally tried to eat him, and yes, he still had no idea what half the alien dignitaries were saying during negotiations. But he had gained a measure of respect, or at least notoriety, throughout the galaxy. It turned out being the first human to infiltrate the upper echelons of alien royalty came with perks. A personal starship, a suite of luxurious quarters, and the ability to veto any dish involving sentient pudding. "Advisor Zeke," purred Queen Zralta as she swept into the throne room, her tentacles gleaming under the bioluminescent chandeliers. "We have a matter of great importance to discuss." Zeke snapped to attention, trying not to trip over his overly shiny boots. "Of course, Your Majesty. What's on your mind?" Her glowing eyes narrowed. "Your former commander, Bixby." Zeke froze, his brain filled with memories of the cantankerous old man and his ridiculous schemes, followed by the sting of betrayal when Bixby had thrown him, literally and figuratively, into the Queen's court as part of a half-baked peace negotiation. "What about him?" Zeke asked, trying to sound casual. Zralta's smile could have melted titanium. "He's been meddling in my affairs. A rogue move here, a stolen shipment there. Nothing egregious, but it's beginning to irritate me. You, however, are uniquely positioned to deal with him." "Me?" Zeke blinked. "Why me?" She leaned closer, her tentacles twitching in amusement. "Because he made you what you are today, and because I suspect you might enjoy the chance for revenge." 2 days later, Zeke found himself aboard a sleek, heavily armed star cruiser, standing on the bridge as they tracked Bixby's ship, the Wobbly Nebula. He stared at the view screen, a mixture of emotions swirling in his chest. On the one hand, he owed the old man for teaching him how to survive in the chaos of the galaxy. On the other hand, Bixby had essentially sold him to an alien queen without so much as a goodbye. Zralta appeared beside him, her presence commanding yet oddly comforting. "Tell me, Zeke," she said, her voice softer than usual. "Do you wish to confront him?" Zeke hesitated. "Honestly, I'm not sure. He's infuriating, but he's also, well, Bixby. The galaxy's biggest lunatic, but also the reason I'm still alive." She tilted her head, considering. "You humans have a strange capacity for forgiveness. It's both fascinating and exasperating." Before Zeke could respond, a frantic beep sounded from the navigation console. A junior officer, who resembled a sentient squid with glasses, spoke up. "Your Majesty, we've located the Wobbly Nebula. It's attempting to evade us." Zralta grinned. "Intercept and disable their engines. Let's pay the good commander a visit." Minutes later, the star cruiser loomed over the much smaller Wobbly Nebula. A tractor beam dragged the ship into the hangar bay, and within moments, a squad of armed guards had surrounded the ship's airlock. The hatch hissed open, and out stepped Commander Bixby, looking as unbothered as ever. He surveyed the armed guards, the Queen, and finally Zeke, before breaking into a wide grin. "Well, well, if it isn't my favorite apprentice," he boomed. "And look at you, all dressed up like a galactic prom king. I taught you well." Zeke stepped forward, his hands clenched into fists. You abandoned me, Bixby. You didn't even warn me what you were throwing me into. Abandoned you? Bixby said, feigning offense. I gave you the opportunity of a lifetime. Look at you now, trusted advisor to a queen. I'd say you owe me a thank you. Zeralta's tentacles twitched in annoyance. You are in no position to demand gratitude, Commander. You've been interfering in my operations. Explain yourself. Bixby shrugged. Just a little mischief, Your Majesty. Keeps the blood flowing, you know? Zeralta turned to Zeke, her expression serious. The decision is yours, advisor. What shall we do with him? Zeke stared at Bixby, his mind racing. He could have the old man imprisoned or exiled or even executed. But as he looked into Bixby's infuriatingly smug face, an idea struck him. He turned to the Queen. Your Majesty, I propose a different punishment. Her glowing eyes gleamed with curiosity. Go on, Zeke smirked. Make him your advisor. Bixby's grin faltered. Wait, what now? Zeralta tilted her head, intrigued. An interesting proposition. And what purpose would this serve? Zeke folded his arms. He's the most annoying, chaotic, and unpredictable person I've ever met. If anyone can drive your enemies to madness, it's him. The Queen considered this for a moment before nodding. Very well. Commander Bixby, welcome to my court. You will serve under Advisor Zeke. Do try not to cause too much trouble. Bixby sputtered. Under him? Zeke clapped him on the back, grinning. Looks like the apprentice just became the master. Welcome aboard, Commander. And for the first time in his life, Zeke felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be, surrounded by chaos, with the galaxy's most dangerous queen on one side and its most irritating commander on the other. Commander Bixby's tenure as Queen Zeralta's second advisor began with the expected chaos. To his credit, he did manage to outwit several alien warlords, trick a marauding pirate fleet into surrendering with an impromptu karaoke contest, and convince an entire species of hyper-intelligent cockroach people to stop eating starship wiring. But for every victory, there were incidents. Bixby teaching her elite guard to juggle grenades, replacing the royal banner with a crude painting of himself, and once, disastrously, organizing a galactic dodgeball tournament that devolved into a multi-system war. After several months of enduring his antics, Queen Zeralta finally snapped. Zeke, she said one day, her tentacles twitching in a way that suggested either exasperation or the onset of a migraine. Your former commander is unbearable. Zeke, who had spent the morning hiding under his desk to avoid Bixby's new prank-a-day initiative, nodded grimly. Welcome to my world. Zeralta sighed. I can no longer tolerate his presence, yet I recognize that executing him would violate my principles. Therefore, I've decided on an alternative solution. Alternative? Zeke asked warily. I am leaving him on Glorkmoon the Wan, the Queen declared, her tone final. Zeke's eyes widened. Glorkmoon Twaun, that's barely a habitable rock. Zeralta's tentacles curled with amusement. Precisely. It is home to only one inhabitant, a reclusive space orc known as Grimdasha. She has expressed, shall we say, a unique interest in humans. Zeke's stomach sank. Interest? The Queen's glowing eyes sparkled with mischief. She has spent decades dreaming of a human mate. Bixby will fulfill her desires. Wait, Zeke said, holding up his hands. You can't just— Silence, Zeralta interrupted. It is decided. Prepare the shuttle. 1 week later, the wobbly nebula, rigged to autopilot, landed on the dusty surface of Glorkmoon the Peru. Commander Bixby, still blissfully unaware of his fate, strolled down the ramp, humming a jaunty tune and wearing his signature crooked grin. The first thing he noticed was the oppressive silence. The second was the towering figure of Grimdasha, who emerged from her modest stone hut with the grace of a space walrus and the enthusiasm of a carnival barker. She was everything one might expect from a lonely space orc: massive tusks, green skin that shimmered oddly in the moonlight, and a collection of braids adorned with what appeared to be old engine parts. Her eyes lit up the moment she saw Bixby. "A human!" she bellowed, her deep voice reverberating across the barren landscape. "At last, the mating prophecy is fulfilled." Bixby froze, his grin faltering. Mating prophecy? That doesn't sound good. Grimdasha lumbered toward him, her tusks gleaming ominously. "For years, I've waited for a mate strong enough to bear my offspring. You will stay here with me and help rebuild my clan." "Rebuild?" Bixby squeaked, backing away. "Listen, love, I think there's been a mistake. I'm not really the, domestic type." Grimdasha cackled, the sound echoing like thunder. "You will learn." Bixby darted back to the ship, only to discover that Zralta's engineers had locked him out of the controls. He pounded on the hatch uselessly as Grimdasha approached, her grin growing wider by the second. "Don't worry," she said, reaching out with a massive hand. "You'll like it here. I make excellent stew." Bixby's voice rose to a panicked wail. "Zeke, you traitor!" Back aboard the Queen's ship, Zeke watched the live feed from Glorkmuntuan, equal parts horrified and amused. Bixby's tiny figure was darting around the desolate landscape, dodging Grimdasha with all the agility of a space squirrel cornered by a hungry Zornox. "Is this really necessary?" Zeke asked, glancing at Zralta. The Queen sipped her glowing drink, utterly unbothered. "It is both necessary and entertaining. Besides, she is quite lonely. Bixby will adapt, or not. Either way, it solves my problem." Zeke sighed, a pang of guilt tugging at him. Despite everything, Bixby had been his mentor. What if he escapes? Zralta smirked. "He won't, but if he does, I'll consider taking him back, on the condition that you supervise him personally." Zeke shuddered. "Let's hope it doesn't come to that." As the feed showed Grimdasha finally catching up to Bixby and tossing him over her shoulder like a sack of potatoes, Zeke decided that for once, the galaxy might be a better place without Commander Horatio Bixby in it. But knowing Bixby, he wouldn't stay down for long. Somewhere, deep in the cosmos, chaos was brewing, and it had his name written all over it. And besides, he was having the most fun he had ever in his entire life, and all thanks to Commander Bixby.